As Sarah Peterson waited in the hospital hallway for her daughter Emily's kidney transplant results, she couldn't help but feel uneasy every time she glanced at the young man sitting at the far end of the bench, a dark-skinned stranger named Jamal Williams. His presence made her uncomfortable. Why was he there? Why was he waiting outside the same room? And why had the doctor called him in, too? Sarah subtly motioned to her husband, pulling Emily closer to create some distance. Jamal noticed everything, but stayed silent. Inside the exam room, the doctor smiled. Emily's kidney transplant was a success. Sarah burst into tears of joy. But then came the next sentence, and the donor who made this miracle possible is right here. Jamal. In that instant, Sarah's world turned upside down, revealing the painful face of prejudice and the power of quiet compassion. Before the story starts, drop a comment. Which city are you watching from? And if you stand for justice and equality, share this story and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can make our voices stronger. The fluorescent lights of Boston Children's Hospital cast their familiar sterile glow across the third-floor waiting area. Sarah Peterson sat rigidly on the wooden bench, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Beside her, her husband Tom stared at the floor, his jaw working with the kind of tension that came from weeks of sleepless nights and impossible prayers. Between them, 8-year-old Emily dozed fitfully, her small body curled against her father's side, the hospital bracelet on her thin wrist a constant reminder of how fragile her life had become. 2 weeks ago, Emily had undergone a kidney transplant, the culmination of 3 years of dialysis, hospital stays, and the desperate search for a matching donor. The surgery had gone well, the doctors said, but the real test was whether her body would accept the new organ or reject it. Today, they would finally get the results of the critical blood work that would tell them if the transplant had been successful. Sarah's eyes moved constantly around the waiting area, unable to settle, her anxiety manifesting as a kind of hypervigilance that made everything feel like a potential threat. That's when she noticed him. At the far end of the bench, separated by 2 empty seats, sat a young black man in his late 20s. He wore faded jeans, scuffed Nike sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie that had seen better days. His face carried the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks, but there was something gentle in his expression as he stared at his hands, turning them over slowly, as if examining them for the first time. Sarah's gaze lingered on him longer than she meant to, her mind automatically cataloging details and making assumptions. Why was he here? This was the transplant unit waiting area. Was he waiting for test results too? Or was he just lingering? The hospital had been dealing with theft issues lately, she'd heard. Security had mentioned it during one of Emily's previous visits. She glanced at Tom, catching his eye, and with the subtle communication that comes from 15 years of marriage, she tilted her head slightly toward the young man. Tom followed her gaze, his expression unreadable, but Sarah saw his arm tighten protectively around Emily. The young man, Jamal Williams, though Sarah didn't know his name, seemed to sense the attention. His eyes lifted briefly, meeting Sarah's gaze for just a moment before she quickly looked away, her face flushing with something between guilt and defensiveness. In that brief exchange, Jamal saw what he'd seen countless times before, the automatic suspicion, the subtle recoil, the instant judgment based on nothing but his appearance. He looked back down at his hands, at the fresh surgical scars on his left side that still ached with every breath, and felt the familiar weight of being constantly assessed and found wanting before he'd even spoken a word. Sarah leaned closer to Tom, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't like him sitting so close to Emily." "Sarah," Tom began, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first time they'd had this kind of conversation. "I'm just saying we should be careful. We don't know who he is or why he's here." Tom looked at the young man again, seeing nothing particularly threatening, but years of marriage had taught him that sometimes it was easier to accommodate Sarah's anxieties than to argue. "Come here, sweetheart," he said softly to Emily, gently shifting her to his other side, effectively placing himself between his daughter and Jamal. The movement wasn't subtle. Jamal watched it happen, watched the family unit close ranks against him, watched the mother's shoulders relax slightly once that extra distance had been established. He'd been through this choreography so many times he could predict every step. Still, it stung. Every time it stung. He thought about leaving, about finding another waiting area, or just going home. But Dr. Chen had asked him to be here today, had said it was important that he be present for the results. So he stayed, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening, less noticeable. 20 minutes passed in heavy silence. Sarah checked her phone obsessively, though there were no new messages. Tom made quiet conversation with Emily, who'd woken up and was asking when the doctor would come. And Jamal sat motionless, counting the tiles on the floor, trying to ignore the periodic glances Sarah threw his way. When Dr. Chen finally emerged from the examination room, her presence immediately commanded attention. She was a small woman in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the efficient demeanor of someone who delivered both good news and devastating news more times than she cared to count. Peterson family, she called, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of pediatric medicine. Sarah and Tom stood immediately, Tom lifting Emily into his arms despite her protests that she could walk. They moved toward the door, relief and terror mixing on their faces. Jamal, Dr. Chen added, nodding toward the young man at the end of the bench. Please come in as well. The word stopped Sarah mid-step. She turned, confusion evident on her face, and watched as Jamal slowly stood, his movement careful, one hand briefly touching his left side, as if protecting an injury. Why is he? Sarah began, but Dr. Chen had already ushered them all into the examination room, a space barely large enough for the desk, medical equipment, and now 5 people. The room felt crowded and tense. Sarah positioned herself so that Emily was blocked from Jamal's view, her body language screaming distrust. Tom looked between Jamal and the doctor, trying to piece together why a stranger had been invited to what should have been a private family consultation. Dr. Chen settled behind her desk, pulling up Emily's chart on her computer. I wanted to share Emily's test results with all of you together, she began, her eyes moving between the family and Jamal. Because this is truly a team effort, and everyone here has a right to know the outcome. Sarah's confusion was morphing into irritation. Doctor, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure why this gentleman needs to be present for my daughter's private medical information. Jamal shifted uncomfortably, his eyes on the floor. He'd been through this explanation before during the counseling sessions, but he'd never actually met the recipient's family. The anonymity of the donation process usually prevented this kind of direct interaction. Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps disappointment in Sarah's tone, perhaps anticipation of what was about to unfold. I'll explain that in just a moment, Mrs. Peterson. First, let me share the results that I know you've been anxiously awaiting. She turned the computer screen slightly, so the family could see the graphs and numbers that meant everything and nothing to non-medical eyes. Emily's kidney function is excellent. Her creatinine levels are normal. There are no signs of rejection, and her body is accepting the new organ beautifully. The relief that washed over Sarah and Tom was physical, shoulders dropping, breath releasing, tears immediately forming. Emily, not fully understanding but picking up on her parents' emotion, smiled widely. She's okay? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Really okay? Really okay, Dr. Chen confirmed with a warm smile. The transplant was a complete success. With proper care and medication, Emily should live a completely normal, healthy life. Sarah collapsed into Tom's arms, both of them crying openly now. Emily giggled at her parents' emotional display, not quite grasping the magnitude of what she'd been through or how close they'd come to losing her. In his corner of the room, Jamal watched the family's joy with a small, genuine smile. This was why he'd done it. This moment of relief and happiness, this gift of a future that had been uncertain, this was worth every moment of pain, every difficult recovery day, every sacrifice. But Sarah, even in her relief, shot another look toward Jamal, her expression still guarded, still questioning his presence in this intimate family moment. Dr. Chen allowed them a moment to absorb the good news before she continued. Now, as I mentioned, this was a team effort, and there's someone in this room who I need to properly introduce to you. She stood, moving from behind her desk to stand beside Jamal, her hand briefly touching his shoulder in a gesture of respect and gratitude. Mrs. and Mr. Peterson, Emily, Dr. Chen said, her voice taking on a formal, almost ceremonial quality. I'd like you to meet the person who made this miracle possible. The person who, without ever knowing Emily, decided to give her the greatest gift one human can give another. The person who underwent surgery, took on medical risks, and will carry the impact of this decision for the rest of his life. Sarah's face was changing, the pieces clicking together in her mind, but not quite forming a complete picture yet. Her eyes moved from Dr. Chen to Jamal, truly seeing him for the first time. This is Jamal Williams, Dr. Chen continued, her voice warm with genuine admiration. He's the living donor who gave Emily her new kidney. He's the reason your daughter is going to live a full, healthy life. He's the hero you've been praying for. The words landed like a physical blow. Sarah's face went through a rapid progression of emotions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and then a crushing wave of shame so intense it was visible. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The tears that had been tears of relief moments ago transformed into something else entirely. Tom's face reflected his own shock, but also immediate gratitude mixed with guilt as he realized how they'd treated their daughter's savior. You. Sarah tried to speak, but couldn't find words adequate to the moment. Jamal, who had been standing quietly through the introduction, offered a small, almost shy smile. Hi, he said simply, his voice gentle. I'm really glad Emily's doing well. That's all that matters. Dr. Chen continued, perhaps sensing that the family needed more information to process what they were learning. Jamal registered as a living donor 2 years ago. When Emily's case was entered into the database, he came up as a near-perfect match. He went through extensive testing, counseling, and medical evaluation. And 3 weeks ago, he underwent a major surgical procedure to donate his kidney to a little girl he'd never met. She gestured to Jamal's side, where his hand had unconsciously moved to rest. He's still recovering, actually. The pain from the surgery can last for months. But when I called him today and asked if he'd like to be here to learn Emily's results, he said yes without hesitation. Sarah's legs seemed to give out slightly, and Tom quickly guided her to a chair. Her face was buried in her hands, and her shoulders shook with the weight of what she was processing. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know it was you. I thought. I was so worried about Emily, and I wasn't thinking clearly, and I just... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the assumptions she'd made, the prejudice she'd acted on, the way she'd treated her daughter's savior as a threat rather than the angel he actually was. Tom extended his hand to Jamal, his own voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know if there are even words. You saved our daughter's life. You gave us our future back. Jamal shook his hand, his grip firm despite the obvious discomfort the movement caused. She deserved a chance, he said simply. Every kid deserves a chance. Emily, who had been watching the adult interactions with a child's acute perception, suddenly understood more than her parents realized. You gave me your kidney, she asked Jamal directly, her 8-year-old voice cutting through the emotional tension. I did, Jamal confirmed, crouching down slightly to be at her eye level, though the movement clearly pained him. Does it hurt? A little, Jamal admitted honestly. But it's getting better every day, and knowing that you're okay makes it worth it. Emily's response was immediate and pure. She launched herself from her father's arms and wrapped herself around Jamal in a tight hug. Thank you for saving my life, she said with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. Jamal's arms came around her carefully, and for the first time since he'd entered the waiting room, his expression fully relaxed into genuine joy. This was why he'd done it. This exact moment. Sarah finally looked up, her face red and tear-stained, and met Jamal's eyes directly. What she saw there, kindness, understanding, and no judgment despite how she'd treated him, only made her shame cut deeper. "I'm so sorry," she managed to say. "I'm so incredibly sorry. For how I looked at you, for how I acted, for making assumptions when you were sitting there recovering from surgery that saved my daughter. I have no excuse. None." Jamal gently extracted himself from Emily's hug and straightened, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt to be treated that way. It did. But I also understand that you were scared for your daughter and worried about her safety. Fear makes us act in ways we wouldn't normally act." "That's generous of you," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "More generous than I deserve." "Maybe," Jamal agreed quietly. "But I'd rather focus on what we created together than what divided us for an hour. Emily has a future now. That's what matters." Dr. Chen, who had been watching the interaction with the wisdom of someone who'd witnessed many such moments, spoke up. "Jamal, would you be willing to tell the Petersons a little bit about why you became a donor? I think they'd like to know." Jamal hesitated, not comfortable being the center of attention, but he nodded. "My little sister had kidney disease when we were kids. She needed a transplant, and we waited on the list for years. By the time a kidney became available, it was almost too late. She's okay now. She's in college and healthy. But I remember what that waiting did to my family. The fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of helplessness." He paused, his voice carrying the weight of those memories. "I registered as a living donor the day I turned 25 because I knew there were families out there going through what mine went through. And if I could help one of them, if I could give one family their miracle, then whatever I had to give up was worth it." The room was silent except for the soft sounds of Sarah crying and the distant beep of medical equipment in the hallway. "You're a pediatric nurse," Dr. Chen added, "at this hospital, actually, which is how we were able to coordinate the surgery so smoothly." Tom's eyes widened. "You work here? With sick children?" "In the oncology ward," Jamal confirmed. "I've been there for 3 years. I love the work, even when it's hard. Kids are resilient. They teach me something new every day." Sarah stood slowly, moving toward Jamal with hesitant steps, as if afraid he might reject her approach after how she treated him. "Jamal, I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to apologize adequately for judging you based on nothing but ignorance and prejudice." "You don't have to make it right," Jamal said gently. "You just have to do better. For Emily, and for everyone else you meet. That's all any of us can do. Learn and do better." She nodded, tears flowing freely now. Would you be willing to stay in touch with us? To let us thank you properly? To be part of Emily's life as she grows up healthy because of what you did?" Jamal looked at Dr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "If you'd like that, and if it's okay with everyone, I'd be honored. I'd love to see Emily grow up and thrive." Emily, who had been processing everything with a child's remarkable adaptability, took Jamal's hand in her small one. "Can you come to my birthday party? It's in 3 weeks. I'm going to be 9. Jamal laughed, a genuine, warm sound that transformed his tired face. "I would love to come to your birthday party, Emily." As they prepared to leave the examination room, Dr. Chen pulled Jamal aside briefly. "You know, in all my years of medicine, I've never seen a more powerful demonstration of how prejudice crumbles in the face of truth. Thank you for handling that with such grace." "I've had a lot of practice," Jamal said quietly. "Doesn't make it easier, but it makes me better at responding with kindness instead of anger." In the hallway, other families waiting for their own results watched curiously as the Peterson family and the young black man who'd been sitting alone on the bench emerged together. Emily holding Jamal's hand, Tom with his arm around both of them, and Sarah walking close, her expression one of profound humility and gratitude. Sometimes the greatest teachers are moments of shame that force us to confront our own biases. Sometimes angels come in forms we don't recognize because we've been taught to fear rather than see. And sometimes, the person you treated as a threat turns out to be the hero who saved everything you hold dear. 3 weeks later, at Emily's 9th birthday party in the Petersons' backyard, Jamal sat surrounded by family and friends, his story shared by Sarah with tears and humility. She'd made it her mission to tell everyone what had happened, not to punish herself, but to help others recognize their own biases before they hurt someone who might be their miracle. Jamal watched Emily run and laugh with her friends, her energy a testament to the healthy kidney functioning inside her. The ache in his side had lessened, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder of what he'd given. But watching Emily blow out her birthday candles, seeing her family's joy, and knowing that she'd grow up to do wonderful things because she'd been given this chance, that made every sacrifice worth it. Sometimes justice is served not through punishment, but through revelation. Sometimes the best response to prejudice is simply to be so good, so kind, so generous that shame becomes its own teacher. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give isn't just an organ. It's the gift of forcing someone to confront their own prejudice and choose to become better.